Hi, my name's Pauline, and I was born in Canterbury in 1931. My memory starts from when I was about 4 years old, 4.5 maybe, and where we lived, there was Mrs. Galvin living on one side, no children, delightful couple, really, really nice. And on the left-hand side was the Gower family. And Gwenny Gower, or Gwendolyn as she was called, but we called her Gwenny, was my playmate. And I remember being very disappointed because she started school before me. She was that little bit older. But we had great fun together making, can you believe, mud pies in the garden. That was my first memory. She was a super girl, but I was very envious of her being in school before me. Couldn't wait for her to come home to tell me all that happened. And it was so exciting. My mum used to say, now when you go to school, you have to be such a good girl. And if you're a good girl, you will be getting just what you've asked for, which was a doll's house. Well, now I'm a very old lady, and I never did get my doll's house. I always remember it. Oh, dear me. But nevertheless, life was very good. Had some fun. But when I started school, things were very different. I had to become grown up before I was old enough to be grown up. And I remember having to go to the shop to get a £2 jar of jam. And the shop was not far away from us, but nevertheless, I was a little bit scared, but I had to do it because I think there must have been some kind of emergency in the house where Mum couldn't go. And I walked to the shop very nicely, and as I was in the shop, I heard this awful noise outside, and I was a bit scared. Didn't know what was happening. And suddenly the shop was full, and they were gypsies. And when I came out the shop, there was this line of caravans, and the people were sitting with their backs against the housing fences, and I had to walk over their feet because there wasn't enough room between where they were sitting and where I had to walk. And I was carrying this £2 pot of jam, very, very frightened, and I dropped it. I was so scared, but I had to get away. I don't know why I was frightened of them. I really don't. But when I got home, Mum said I was scared and my fingers were bleeding because I tried to pick it up. Anyway, can't remember what happened from there, but it was an awful, awful memory for me. Anyway, that got sorted out and school became a happy place. My teacher was called Miss Knight, and she was absolutely lovely. I attended St Paul's School, Canterbury, Kent, which was a Church of England school. And we had a church service about twice a week, maybe 3 times at Easter. And we had to enter the church from our playground. And I remember thinking the very first time we went in, as a little girl, oh, it was just so big, but really, really beautiful. Came out, it seemed like a long time, but I'm sure it wasn't. And then back into school, back into the classroom. Well, in the next classroom to me was Gwenny, my neighbour, because she was that little bit older. We used to meet up in the playground, and we were very good at playing a game called Poor Mary Sat A-Weeping. And you had a little girl or boy in the middle, and whoever it was sang this song, Poor Mary sat a weeping on a bright summer's day. Pray tell me what she's weeping for. And she was weeping for a partner. And then you had to choose a partner and run round the circle to try and get back before the person you chose. Great fun, until you fell over, and then it was a bit disastrous. That went on for a little while, and then we went off and drew on the playground floor, which we were allowed to do in those days, big squares with numbers, and we played hopscotch. Well, that was quite competitive. I was very lucky because I was quite tall for my age. Wish I was now. But anyway, we had great fun. And then the bell would go and off we go back into school. The teacher this night, I remember it so well, always sat at her desk, never moved around the classroom at all. We had to go to her. But it was lovely because sometimes when you went and you'd done some good work, you got a star, which was very exciting in those days, I can tell you. And life went on. That was for about, I don't know how long, it seemed a long time. But you always stayed in the same class for a year. Well, during that year, my brother Ivan started school. Now, Ivan came to the same school, but he was, when we met up at, he was in the infants then, and as was I was reception, I was the grown-up one. He was in a little infant class. And they had to go in, the boys had to go into a separate playground, which was divided from our playground by a fence. Not a fence, railings really. And poor Ivan, who was terrified, didn't like school at all, used to come and stand in the corner and he would be beckoning me across. And I used to go to him and say, I can't come into your playground because it's not, girls can't come in there. Let's find some friends. Well, he found it quite difficult. And I wanted to do two things. I wanted to help him, but I also wanted to play with my friends. Anyway, as time went on, he became a little more settled, I think. And sadly, he had an affliction. He had his head was on one side, and he had to go for an operation. I can't remember what the name was called. My mum used to call it wry neck. That was the one. And he went into hospital and had his head straightened. And he began to pick up, but he never liked school at this stage. And it was very difficult for me because I loved it and he didn't. But I was the one at my age had to take him to school because my mum had got my sister Irene at home. Well, Irene was born on the July of 37, I think it was. Yes, it was. And she was a dear little thing. I thought she was wonderful. But as she was beginning to grow, it was pretty obvious, not to me, but to adults, that one leg was shorter than the other. And she was taken into the hospital. And when she came out with an iron frame on her leg. Didn't know what it was, but she couldn't walk very well. And my mum used to say, well, that's to make her leg longer, so that she's got two legs the same length. And it worked, really worked. I remember her being such a pretty little girl, though. Very pretty hair, pretty little face. And I was delighted. I'd got two brothers by this stage. Ernest, my eldest brother, who lived with Granny most of the time, and Ivan, who was younger than me. as I've said before. Pardon me. And Irene, oh, it was so sad, really, so sad. And this was 1937. Now, we were playing in the garden one day, and Granny Gower said to me, "We never see you with the dad." And I said, "Yeah, I've got a daddy. Yeah, he's a soldier." Oh. And then Mrs. Gower came out. Oh, I can see it so plainly. Mrs. Gower came out and said, oh, it was tea for Gwenny, that was right. And would I like to go and have a jam sandwich, which I said to Mum, "Can I go?" "Yes, you can go." So I had this jam sandwich. And whilst we were there, Mr. Gower said, oh dear, he said, "Do you know where your daddy is, Pauline?" I said, no. I know he's a soldier, but I don't know where he is. Well, I tell you where he is. He's in India. Now, India's a long way away, and that's why you don't see your daddy at home very often. Oh dear, it was awful. And then, not long after that, my dad came home, and it was absolutely lovely. He'd come out of the forces. His mother, my grandmother in London, had paid for him to come out of the army, which I don't think he really wanted to do, to be honest, because he really loved the regimental side of life. He was a very soft gentleman and just very athletic, I remember. Anyway, he was at home for a little while, and whilst he was home, he worked for a haulage company called Yeomans of Wincheap. I can see him now. And he used to be I presume he was a kind of lorry driver's mate or something, because they used to move furniture for everybody and anybody. Anyway, it was one Sunday, Saturday. Sorry, I beg your pardon. It was a Saturday. And we knew that the apples from the orchard in Wincheap, where Dad used to pass by every day, were selling apples. And we had a wheelbarrow, which sometimes Ivan used to ride in while Dad pushed it. And Dad, Ivan and I walked to the orchard in Wincheap to get the apples. And by this time we'd moved house. I remember, because Dad got the house from the firm. It was a house that belonged to the firm for whom he worked for, Yeomans. And this house was 60 Stour Street. No, Stour, Stou, was in Canterbury. And